I drove 2 hours to get to the family dinner. My father opened the door before I could knock, looked past me at the driveway, and handed me the apron from the hook inside. "Robert's girlfriend is coming tonight," he said. "Don't ruin this." I did not ruin anything. I hung up my own coat. I went to the kitchen. I checked the oven and set the good plates, the ones I have never eaten off of. Then my brother's girlfriend walked through the front door, stepped into the hallway, and stopped. She looked at me from across the room and went completely still. She already knew who I was. My father did not. He never has. My bag was still on my shoulder. I had been in the house for less than 4 minutes, and I already had a job. My name is Lisa. I am 30 years old. What I do for work, I will get to. But what matters right now is that my family has never found the right words for it. My father explained it to someone at a dinner very much like this one by saying, "Lisa does something with people, a kind of passion project." He moved on before I could respond. I did not stop him. I never stop him. It has always felt easier to let it go than to defend myself to a man who has already decided what I am worth, and decided a long time ago. Stay with me through this one. Because what happens at that dinner table, what Jacqueline says when she finally speaks, I have never been able to tell anyone without watching their expression change. Don't go anywhere. Robert arrived 20 minutes after I did. I heard the car from the kitchen, the particular sound of tires on gravel that made my father move differently. I was dicing onions when he passed the doorway without looking in, straightening the back of his shirt with both hands as he walked toward the front of the house. I set down the knife and listened. The door opened. Then my father's voice, fuller than it had been all evening, the kind of voice he keeps stored somewhere and only brings out for certain people. There he is. I have spent 30 years watching my father greet my brother, and it has never stopped being its own small education. The handshake first, firm, held a half-second longer than necessary, the kind that means "I'm proud of you," without either of them having to say it. Then the hand on the shoulder, then the step back to get a look, as though Robert might have changed since the last time, as though there is always something new and worth noticing. My father laughed at something Robert said before the sentence was even finished. The house felt larger when Robert was in it. That is the only way I know how to describe it. Like the rooms expanded slightly to make space for him. I went back to the onions. Robert came into the kitchen a few minutes later and hugged me from behind, the way he has since we were children. Arms around my shoulders, chin briefly on the top of my head. "Smells good," he said. I told him it was Dad's recipe. He said, "Of course it is," and grabbed a piece of bread from the basket on the counter and was gone before I could say anything else. That was the visit. That was the catching up. My father appeared in the doorway shortly after. He looked at the stove, then at the counter, then at me, conducting a quiet inventory. "The good glasses are still in the cabinet," he said. "Make sure they're out before she arrives." He did not ask how my drive was. He did not ask about my work or my apartment or any of the ordinary things people ask when someone they love walks through the door after 2 hours on a highway. He looked at the counter one more time, seemed satisfied with what he found, and left. I dried my hands on the apron. There is a particular kind of loneliness that does not announce itself. It does not arrive with tears or a specific moment you can point to later. It is just the steady accumulation of being looked through, dinner after dinner, year after year, until you stop expecting anything different and start calling that peace. I got out the good glasses. The apron lives on the third hook from the left, just inside the kitchen doorway. It has always been there. Cream-colored once, now closer to beige, with a small brown stain near the hem that survived every wash because nobody ever soaked it properly. I know this apron the way you know a scar, not because you study it, but because it is simply always there when you look down. I tied it without thinking. That is the part that stays with me now. My hands found the strings behind my back and looped them into a bow before I had made any conscious decision to put it on. Muscle memory. The body keeping records the mind would rather lose. I have been tying that apron since I was 19. The first time, my mother was still alive, and it was her apron, and it made sense for someone to wear it. Then she was gone, and the apron stayed on the hook, and eventually, at some dinner I can no longer name, my father gestured toward the kitchen, and I walked in and put it on, and that became the arrangement. No one announced it, no one asked. It simply calcified into fact, the way so many things do in families that do not talk about what they are doing. The good plates were already out on the counter, white with a thin silver rim, used only when someone worth impressing was coming. I have eaten off these plates twice in my life, both times as a child, before the hierarchy had fully settled. Now I know them primarily by weight. They are heavier than they look. I know this because I am always the one carrying them. I set 4 places at the table. I did this before I caught myself, before I stood back and counted the chairs and understood what I had done. 4 places, my father at the head, Robert across from Jacqueline, and a 4th seat, opposite my father, that I had laid with silverware and a folded napkin and one of the good plates I do not eat from. I stood there for a moment looking at it. Then I took the plate back to the counter, removed the silverware, and refolded the napkin into the pile. 3 places. The table looked right to my father. It had always looked right to him. I am not sure he had ever noticed the missing seat, because you cannot miss what you never expected to be there. I went back to the stove. The apron strings were still tied. I had not taken it off. I do not think it occurred to me to. Jacqueline arrived at 7:14. I know the exact time because I was watching the oven and the timer read 46 minutes remaining when I heard the knock. 2 precise, unhurried taps. The knock of someone who has been told they are expected and believed it. My father's chair scraped back from the living room. Robert was already at the door before him, but my father got there first. That is the only race in this house my father always wins. I turned the burner to low and untied the apron. I do not know why I did that. Some instinct toward dignity, maybe. The same one that makes you sit up straighter when a stranger enters the room. The small, unconscious adjustments we make when we want to be seen as something other than what we have been reduced to. I folded the apron over the counter's edge and walked to the hallway. My father was already performing. I could hear it before I saw it. The voice he uses for people he wants to impress. Warm and expansive, with a looseness he never directs at me. He was saying something about the drive, asking if she found it all right, touching the collar of his shirt with 2 fingers the way he does when he is slightly nervous. Robert had her coat. He was smiling the way men smile when they are proud of something they consider theirs. Jacqueline was composed in the way that some people are composed, not stiff, not performing ease, simply at home in herself in a way that had nothing to do with the house she was standing in. She was answering my father's questions with a kind of patient warmth, her eyes moving around the hallway in the natural way of someone taking in a new place. And then her eyes found me. I had just stepped into the hallway from the kitchen. I was standing slightly to the side, out of the main current of the greeting, the way you stand when you have arrived at a party you were not invited to, but are expected to cater. I had my hands loose at my sides. I was about to say something ordinary. "Hi, I'm Lisa. It's nice to meet you." The standard sentence I keep ready for these occasions. But Jacqueline had stopped. Not dramatically, not in a way that my father or Robert noticed, occupied as they were with coats and pleasantries and the performance of welcome. Just a half-second of stillness, a pause that did not belong to the rhythm of the room. Her expression did not change exactly, but something behind it did, a door opening quietly, somewhere behind her eyes. She looked at me the way people look at something they were not expecting to find. We moved to the table at 7:30. I served the soup first, coming out of the kitchen with 2 bowls balanced carefully, setting my father's down before Robert's, the order of precedence so ingrained I no longer had to think about it. Then back for 2 more. Jacqueline thanked me each time. My father unfolded his napkin. Robert was already talking. He had a new project. Something in private equity, a restructuring deal with a firm based out of Zurich. The kind of thing that requires a specific vocabulary to describe, and an even more specific audience to appreciate. My father was both. He leaned forward by degrees as Robert talked, his elbows moving closer to the table, his face arranging itself into the expression he reserves for things he finds genuinely impressive. Eyebrows slightly raised, mouth set, nodding with the slow gravity of a man confirming what he already suspected. Yes, of course, that's exactly right. He asked questions, but not real questions, the kind designed to give Robert more room, more surface area, more opportunity to continue. I went back to the kitchen and brought out the bread. Jacqueline participated in the conversation with the ease of someone who understood the material and did not need to prove it. She asked one precise question about the Zurich deal that made Robert pause for a half-second before answering, and I noticed that, even if no one else did. But what I noticed more was this. Every time I came out of the kitchen, her eyes found me first. Not obtrusively, not in a way that disrupted anything, just a quiet reorientation, like a compass needle making a small correction. She would be mid-sentence or mid-listen, and I would come through the doorway with a dish or a serving spoon, and her gaze would move to me before returning to the table. Once, when I leaned across to refill my father's water glass, I looked up and found her already watching. She did not look away quickly, the way people do when they've been caught. She simply held it for a moment, something careful and considered in her expression, and then returned to my brother. My father did not notice. He was talking about Robert's first year out of college, a story Robert has heard enough times to smile at on cue. I cleared the soup bowls and brought out the main course and moved around the table in the efficient, unobtrusive way I have perfected over years of these dinners. Present enough to be useful, invisible enough not to interrupt. Jacqueline watched me the whole evening, quietly, consistently, in the way of someone assembling something, turning a fact over and over until it fits. It happened the way it always happens, gradually and then all at once. My father had been building toward it for most of the meal without knowing he was doing it. The Zurich deal had run its course, and the conversation had softened into the comfortable territory of family history, the edited version my father keeps polished and ready for company. He talked about the house, about the neighborhood, about Robert's Little League season in 1998 that I do not remember attending but apparently occurred. Jacqueline listened with genuine interest, asking small questions, laughing at the right moments. My father was warm in a way I had not seen in some time. He was enjoying himself. He had an audience that was not me. I was standing at the kitchen doorway when it turned. Jacqueline had asked something simple. I almost missed it over the sound of my own movement, setting a serving dish back on the counter. Something like, "And what about Lisa? What does she do?" The most ordinary question, the kind asked at every table in every home without consequence. My father paused, not a long pause, just long enough to locate the right drawer in his mind and find it somewhat empty. He tilted his head slightly, the way he does when he is searching for something he knows he should have closer to hand. Then he settled on an answer with the mild confidence of a man who does not realize he is saying anything worth examining. "Lisa does something with people," he said. "A kind of care work, volunteering, that sort of thing." He moved his hand once, a small, dismissive arc, the gesture of a man closing a parenthesis. "She's always been the helper type." Then, without pause, without looking at me in the doorway, he turned back to Robert and asked about the timeline on the Zurich close. That was it. 11 seconds, approximately. I have since counted it in my head more times than I would like to admit. I stood in the doorway with a dish towel in my hands and waited for Robert to say something. He knows what I do. He has known for years. We have talked about it. Not often, not with any great depth, but enough that the information exists somewhere inside him, filed and retrievable. He reached for his wine glass. He took a sip. He answered the question about Zurich. My father had moved on and taken the room with him. I went back to the kitchen. I refolded the dish towel. I placed it on the counter with the kind of careful, deliberate motion you use when what you actually want to do is something else entirely. I heard the fork before I saw anything. A clean sound, ceramic and metal, the kind that does not happen by accident. I was at the counter with my back to the dining room when it landed, and I knew, in the way you sometimes know things before you understand them, that something had changed in the room behind me. I turned around slowly. Jacqueline had set her fork down parallel to her plate, with a precision that suggested the placement was intentional. She was looking at my father with an expression I had not seen directed at him before. Not hostile, not warm, simply level. The kind of attention that expects to be answered. "I'm sorry," she said. "Could you say that again? What Lisa does?" My father looked mildly surprised, the way people look when a conversation they considered finished turns out not to be. He smiled, accommodating, the gracious host. "She works with people," he said again. "Volunteering, care work. She's always had a soft heart." He said it like a compliment. He believed it was one. Jacqueline nodded slowly. Then she folded her hands on the table and turned briefly toward me in the doorway and back to my father, and she began to speak. She did not raise her voice. She did not perform anything. She spoke the way people speak when they have no need of volume, because the content is sufficient on its own. She told him her younger sister's name. She told him about the accident. A single sentence, no elaboration, just the bare fact of it. She told him the age her sister was when it happened, and the age she was when she stopped making meaningful progress, and the name of the facility they had tried, and the name of the one they found afterward. And then she said my name. She said it the way you say the name of someone you have not forgotten and will not. She told him what I did for her sister over 14 months. She was specific. She used the correct terminology without condescension, the way someone speaks when they have spent enough time in a world to learn its language. She told him about the floor, that I worked on the floor, because that is where her sister was, because that is where the work was, because that is what the work required. My father had stopped smiling somewhere in the middle of it. Robert had set down his own fork. Jacqueline did not look at either of them when she finished. She looked at me, steady and clear, and the look said simply, "I see you. I have always seen you." I wanted him to see you too. The kitchen was very quiet after Jacqueline finished speaking. I could hear the table, the particular silence of people who have been given information they do not know what to do with yet. My father had not responded. I do not think he had found the shape of a response. Robert was looking at the tablecloth with the focused attention of a man thinking carefully about something he would prefer not to think about at all. I looked down at the apron. I had tied it so automatically that evening, so completely without thought, that untying it felt like a different kind of act, deliberate in a way the tying never was. I reached behind my back and found the bow and pulled one string slowly, the way you do when you want to be sure about something before you finish doing it. The knot gave. The strings fell loose at my sides. I took the apron off. I did not fold it. I have folded it at the end of every one of these dinners for 11 years, smoothed the front panel flat and hung it back on the third hook from the left, so it would be ready for the next time. I did not do that. I gathered it loosely in one hand and set it on the counter without ceremony, the way you set down something you have been carrying for a long time and have finally decided to put somewhere outside of yourself. Then I walked out of the kitchen. I crossed the dining room without explaining myself, without asking permission, without the small, apologetic adjustments I usually make when I move through a space my father considers his. I pulled out the empty chair, the fourth one, the one I had set and then unset earlier in the evening, and I sat down at the table. No one said anything. My father looked at me with an expression I could not entirely read, not anger, not warmth, something unresolved, something that had not yet decided what it was. Robert looked up from the tablecloth, briefly, and then back down. Jacqueline was still. She did not smile or nod or make any gesture of acknowledgement. She simply allowed it, the way you allow something that was always supposed to happen. The plates were not cleared. The food sat where it was, half finished, cooling in the good dishes I had carried out and set down and circled for 2 hours. Nobody reached for anything. Nobody suggested we move to the living room or asked if there was dessert. We just sat there, all 4 of us, in the specific discomfort of a room where something true had finally been said out loud and nobody was pretending otherwise. I left at 9:30. I collected my coat from the hook by the door, my own coat, the one I had hung up myself when I arrived, the one nobody had offered to take, and I picked up my bag from the floor of the hallway where I had set it down at the beginning of the evening. My father was in the living room. I could see him from the hallway, seated in his chair, his hands folded in his lap, looking at something in the middle distance that was not the television and not the window. I said goodnight. He said goodnight back. He did not look up. That was all. I have been turning it over since, trying to find something more in it, and I think it is possible that the not looking was the most honest thing he offered me all evening. My father is not a man who apologizes. He does not have the architecture for it. But there was something in the way he held himself in that chair, smaller somehow than he had been at the head of the table, that I am choosing to keep. Robert caught me in the driveway. He came out without a jacket, which meant he had decided quickly, and he stood in the cold with his arms crossed against it and looked at me with an expression I have not seen on him in a long time. Not the dinner table Robert, not the Zurich deal Robert, just my brother, standing on gravel in the dark, trying to find the beginning of something. "I didn't know," he said, "about Jacqueline's sister. I didn't know any of that." I told him I knew he didn't. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I should have said something. When Dad—" He stopped, started again. I should have corrected him. I've let him do that for a long time. I looked at him in the driveway light. He was not wrong, and we both knew it. And I think that shared knowledge was the most honest thing that had passed between us in years. I did not absolve him. I did not tell him it was fine. I just said, "Yeah, you have." And he nodded, slowly, like a man accepting a fair sentence. He hugged me before I got in the car, a real one this time, not the quick chin-on-the-head gesture from the kitchen. He held on for a second longer than necessary, and I let him. I drove the first 20 minutes in complete silence, the heater running, the roads empty. Not crying, not relieved, just quietly, carefully taking stock of what I was bringing home with me, and what I was finally leaving behind. We're almost at the end of this story, but the last part is the one that stayed with me the longest. If you've made it this far, you'll want to see how it closes. Subscribe and keep watching. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday, in a room with pale yellow walls and a window that faced a parking lot, everything became simple. It was an ordinary session on paper, the kind logged in a chart with clinical language that captures the mechanics of a thing, but not its weight. I had set up across the room, the way I always do at this stage, far enough to make the distance real, close enough to matter. I was sitting on the floor. That is where the work happens. That is where it has always happened, on the floor, at the level of the person you are trying to reach. Because the work does not ask you to be comfortable, it asks you to be present. Jacqueline's sister's name is Mara. She is 7 years old. She has a way of concentrating that makes her whole face go still and serious, like a much older person temporarily occupying a child's body. When she is thinking hard about something, she stops blinking. I have spent enough hours with her to know this. She was standing at the other end of the room. She looked at me, and I looked at her, and I said her name once, quietly, the way you say it when you want someone to know you are not going anywhere. And then she took a step. And then another. Not fast, not easy, each one its own small negotiation with gravity, her arms slightly out, her face carrying that complete and serious concentration. She did not look at her feet. She looked at me. Nobody filmed it. There was no one else in the room. The window light was flat and the parking lot outside was ordinary, and there was no music and no particular beauty to the setting. It was just a room, and a child walking across it, and me on the floor watching her come. She made it the whole way and sat down next to me with the satisfied exhale of someone who has finished something difficult, leaning her small shoulder briefly against my arm. I put my hand on top of her head for a moment. That was all. I thought about my father's dining room, the apron on the counter, the chair I pulled out and sat in, the way he had not met my eyes in the hallway. And I understood, sitting on that floor, that I had never needed the chair to be offered. I had never needed the words to be right, or the story to be told correctly, or the credit to land in the right place. The work had always known what it was. It did not need my father's table to confirm it.